Sometimes the limitations or constraints that the designers are faced with can unlock these really interesting solutions.
Well, because of the railroad tracks on one side, active railroad tracks, you couldn't put any major foundations on the west side of the site. And then because the city has a riverwalk requirement, 30-foot wide public walkway open to the sky, we couldn't put any structure on the riverside. So that left us with a very slim area, about 35-foot wide, where we could put a core, which is 3 elevators and 2 shear walls, and then have a 45-foot lee span to the river so that we couldn't go over the river edge. Right. And it, really from that point on, it designed itself to some extent.
Yeah, so, what's interesting is there's probably 4 or 5 foundational precepts that we'll discuss with the design team going into a project. This site, however, seemed highly resistant to some of the basic fundamental parameters that one would normally employ in trying to approach a Class A plus office building. From our standpoint, the site had every single possible thing, but we needed the floor plate, we needed to deliver these other attributes that we consider essential and fundamental. So, what's interesting about that is sometimes the limitations or constraints that the designers are faced with can unlock these really interesting solutions that end up creating something that might have been more interesting than if you started from a completely blank canvas.
Well, we wanted to create, because it was so large, as many different opportunities as we could. Along the Riverwalk, we have some outlooks. We have an area where it's meant for maybe some performances, kind of what do we
amphitheater,
call it? Amphitheater type thing. So that's on the area where the main public circulation is, and then on the elevated park, it's more passive, I guess you would say. A couple of areas where people might congregate, but primarily it has to do with really just a park-like setting. How a building meets the ground is, especially with these mid-height buildings, is more important than how it meets the sky. So that ground plane was something that we've always tried to develop.
Normally, the least valuable space is the basement, right? We kind of flipped that. We wanted to put along the riverfront, food and beverage, and then meeting space and conference space amenities. To really, the river is the front door to Chicago. We wanted it to be the front door of the building. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, the design is so much better as a function of the fact that the commercial and the public use, that inherent balance was maybe weighted more to the public side. And I think the project is so much the better for it. And I think that that's going to be kind of a continuing emphasis for the city going forward, is really trying to integrate good public space design incorporated within maybe a more intensive density for a commercial type property.
I think one thing is just the attitude towards the workplace is so much different than what it was. And now everything is in the 150 North Riverside, most everything, that the ceilings are more or less exposed. There's kind of screens and so forth. But so the whole idea, and the much more, of course, the open workstation and so forth. And just in general, for a long time, exposed construction was limited to the warehouse type buildings. But now people realize that it can create almost that same feeling in a brand new steel concrete building.
I think what's really interesting to us, being a somewhat new firm, is how to try to rely on subject matter experts, our design consultants, to try to stimulate innovation in the way that directly responds to user needs. Chicago right now is a really dynamic office and residential market. And we're seeing that provoke interesting changes in the design and adaptation of buildings to respond to that.